Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Welcome to another episode in our debut Spotlight series, where we shine the light on the freshest authors and their work. Today, the spotlight is on Holly Brickley and her debut novel, Deep Cuts, which is currently taking the world by storm. It is a beautiful love story, perfect for fans of Normal People and Daisy Jones and the Six, and I absolutely loved it. Author of Deep Cuts, Holly Brickley is a writer who was born and raised in Hope, British Columbia. At the age of 18, Holly moved to the States to study English at UC Berkeley and then went on to get an MFA in fiction at Columbia University. Holly worked in trend research and branding for a decade, but has now returned to fiction with her amazing debut novel, Deep Cuts, which is out now and published by Borough Press in the UK and by Penguin Random House in the US and Canada. Here to chat all about it, welcome Holly to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Now, before we dive into your book, which, as I said, I absolutely loved, I love to open by asking what you're currently reading.
I am currently in the middle of Fundamentally by
Oh my
Nostal.
gosh, it's on my shelf and I need to get to this.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really fresh and edgy and funny. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. We had the same pub date in the US.
Oh
So
wow.
and we're both debuts. So we were, just being tagged and things for the past year and got friendly online. So
Oh,
yeah.
she's amazing. I went to an event that she did here in the UK and she was just so funny and just such a brilliant speaker. Like I could have listened to her all day. So I'm really excited to read that. But let's get into your book. Now, I obviously this is a debut novel and I'm always interested in hearing about somebody's journey to having their debut published because obviously it's different for everybody. As I said, you worked in trend research and branding for a decade, which I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody that's done that job, so I'm very intrigued. What was that journey like for you and how did you end up, moving away from writing and fiction to returning to it and creating this beautiful novel?
Well, yeah, it was more than a decade. I had the job that Percy has in the last
Yes.
third of the book where I was paid by I worked for a trend agency and I was paid to basically fly around the US mostly and find the cool people. So I would go into bars and clubs and just find the people that I thought were cool and put them on our panel and then we would do research with them. It was very, very aughts job, naughty's job, you call it there. And then it turned into, I got promoted and that sort of industry died. And then I ended up in brand strategy, which is sort of a higher level version of that. It was very stressful, very lots of travel. I mean, demanding. It was just never, I always wanted to be a writer. I had the MFA, that's always what I wanted to do, but I also had to pay back my student loans and started having a family and lots of responsibilities. So I was kind of stuck in that for a long time. And then, yeah, it was sort of the pandemic, I think, that jostled me out of it. Like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
I'm in my 40s now. So we moved. My husband luckily was amenable to leaving San Francisco where we were living, which is a very, very expensive place to live.
Mhm.
So once we left, we moved to Portland, Oregon, and then I had a little bit more freedom to take a job that paid a little less and finally write. And I wrote Deep Cuts in a year. Little over,
Wow.
yeah.
So was that idea for these characters in this kind of world, do you think that was always bubbling away in the background, or was it just that you sat down and then these ideas just suddenly started coming to you?
I wouldn't say these specific ideas were always bubbling, but I always wanted to write a music, like a rock novel. I read High Fidelity probably like 10 times in high school. That was I don't know, that was just in my head always. And I had
Mhm.
tried before, but I really wanted to offer something new to the tradition. And I wasn't sure that I had nailed that. So I was trying lots of things in the ensuing years, but I was always trying to write, I think a little bit more literary
Mhm.
than I think is my natural state, a little bit further on that spectrum from commercial to literary. And it always felt very difficult. It was hard work at the end of a long day of parenting and
Mhm.
working. And then I finally, when I hit on this, I started writing. I came up with the idea for Percy, and I had some things in myself I was trying to kind of unpack some of
Hmm.
my own hangups. And then once I started writing her and kind of felt the dynamic between her and Joe, writing was no longer difficult for me. It all just kind of came and I was having so much fun. How I was able to do it so fast, is that I was having so much fun writing it.
I think that really comes through as well because it is such a fun read, and obviously it's moving and quite raw in parts, but I think it is a really fun book, and I loved that it was kind of so in the world of music and so kind of obsessed with that, because we don't always get to dive into people's obsessions and what really makes people tick, and I love that kind of stuff. And as you referenced High Fidelity, and the novel does center around music, and it's about like how it connects us and what it brings out in us and what our tastes are like, and how that makes us connect to different people. Where does that love of music come from for you?
I grew up in a very musical family. My dad was a songwriter in the 80s and 90s. Never commercially successful, but had some songs were on the radio, and he was nominated for some Junos, which is like the Canadian version of a Grammy. And everyone in my uncle is also a professional musician and singer-songwriter. So it was never like an option for me
Hmm.
to be into music or not. It was part of the air I grew up breathing. And then I got to college, and I met other people who were into music, of course. That's
Hmm.
a big part of youth. But the way that I was into music, the way it was discussed in our family it was different. I had this
Hmm.
weird adjustment period when I got out of my home, in this very small town in Canada, where I was raised, and our family would hear songs on the radio, and we would say, "Oh, there's such a great hook in the pre-chorus, but then the chorus really lets you down." And this song could have been so much better. And I got to college and I realized nobody else talks about music that way, and actually find it quite annoying. So that all kind of went into Percy too. I was realizing that I did have sort of a unique view on music
Hmm.
that I could bring to it. But at the same time, I really wanted to write through fiction. I wanted to write about the way music feels,
Hmm.
which is very different than I think the goal of music journalism.
Hmm.
I didn't want to get too technical with it because I'm not a musician,
Yeah.
I'm not someone who considers myself a music journalist or an expert in any way. I just like what I like, and I like to think about the way that it makes us feel and the power that it can have on our lives emotionally. So that was sort of the unique thing that I thought I could bring to the rock novel, is to actually really talk about the songs, not in a technical way, with a little bit of a music journalism feel, but bringing to it the things that fiction can do, which is, empathy building
Hmm.
and this emotional excavation and coming of age, all that and love, telling a love story.
I mean, I love all of that stuff. And I think just hearing you talk about music, I think it's so funny how different people react to music, and what it brings out in people. And I've always felt like I'm kind of not cool enough when it comes to music. I think there's always that pressure to be like, oh, well, if I say that I like this artist, like, how am I going to
Yeah.
sound to other people? And I love those little moments in the book where they're talking about specific songs or specific artists, and it's like a kind of underlying judgment, or there's kind of an unsaid judgment on like what they like, and oh God, like, why do you like that song? Or like, what? How can you think that there's a game that the protagonist, sorry, Percy and Joe, who she's friends with throughout this whole book, and it's their kind of love story, and they're talking at the end of the book, and they're doing this kind of game, and they sort of exclude their other friend by the end of the game because they become so invested in having this little tennis match between themselves. And it's like, okay, what is the best song about moving? And then they're like, oh, it's this. And they're like, I can't believe that you think it's that and not this. And I feel like that's like, I get so scared of people judging me because I was a dancer
Yeah.
when I was younger. And so my taste is very all over the place because I dance so many different styles. So I don't have like one set genre. Like, I think hip hop and R&B are the kind of ones that appeal to me the most. But then I kind of like a lot of different things. And I'm always scared of being judged on my music
Yeah.
taste.
I mean, I am too. And I feel like I try to bring that to Percy a little, that she feels she's a very insecure person. She's
Yeah.
secure in her opinions, but has a lot of other insecurities and a lot of internalized misogyny and
Mm.
issues that the women of my generation, I think, realistically deal with, baggage that we carry. But she's insecure about her music taste in a way
Hmm.
too, not her opinions, but like whether she's going to be cool enough. And it bugs her because she knows that's not the point of music. She knows that
Mm.
this is stupid. And especially in the early chapters when they're in college, she, I think, really rejects it, that
Yeah.
this, the way that people use music as an identity signpost or like just to signify coolness is very uninteresting to her.
Mm.
And also uninteresting to Joe. And I think that's one of the ways that they bond.
Yeah.
One of the ways they kind of, it fuels their attraction for each other.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about Percy's voice because it's such a striking voice in the book. And, like you said, she's insecure, but she's also very fierce and opinionated. And I just absolutely loved her character. And I want to know, like, where that voice came from.
Percy was kind of born from the things that I hate most about myself, which are my envy of musicians, because I was kind of the one in my family who didn't really have this
Mhm.
talent in any sort of natural way. And also I can be a little critical, a little perfectionist. And the older I got, the more I realized that these hangups weren't really serving me
Yeah.
well in my life. And I was just wanted to root around in that part of my brain a bit and explore them. And so that's kind of where she started.
Hmm.
The more I wrote her, the more she became her own person,
Hmm.
because the plot is completely fictional and
Yeah.
the other characters are fictional. And then so Joe came about kind of as an oppositional force to her, as somebody who does have all this natural talent and isn't really so hung up on things being perfect because for a few reasons. One is he's a dude and boys are less afraid of being wrong, as she says in one point, quoting My So-Called Life.
Hmm.
And also because he's had some real trauma in his life and he has a little bit more perspective on like what's really worth worrying about and a little bit more freedom to just kind of try things. And so yeah, then she became more of a person because of the dynamic. Like I'm just somebody who kind of writes my way, feels my way through my characters as I
Yeah.
write, and get to know them page by page. And then Zoe came into the mix and she kind of brought a third counterweight that helped me get to know Percy. And anyway, just yeah, she just kind of developed over time. And even though she had started from these things that I wanted to kind of understand about myself, I think she became such this like a lovely person. She made me like myself more
I love
because
that.
yeah, it's sort of an embarrassing thing to say. I can never
Not
even
at
finish
all. I
it.
think that's so special. No, absolutely love that. And I think, as women that we do, I think you're right in the sense of the differences between men and women. And, I don't want to make a big generalization, but I do think we struggle more in terms of being insecure and we lack that confidence in certain areas and not across the board, but I think yeah, it's difficult. And it was really interesting the way you explored that she kind of Percy's mum stops giving her these music lessons, doesn't she, when she's younger, and she just kind of accepts that and goes, right, okay, well, I guess music's not for me then. It's like she just accepts that, whereas Joey kind of pushes through all these kind of barriers and he's like, no, I'm going to do this, and just believes that he has that self-belief that I think she lacks. And I think that's the difference between the two of them. So it was really interesting to see the sort of oppositions or the sort of parallels between their lives. I really loved that. And I also really loved Zoe. I thought she was such a great character and I loved their friendship. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that friendship and why you wanted to feature that.
Yeah, it was really important to me because as I realized that I was writing not just a love story, but also a sort of a Bildungsroman. And for me, my coming of age and discovering myself in my 20s was much more shaped by my female friendships than it ones by any romantic entanglement. So I knew that that had to play a bigger role once I sort of hit the halfway mark. And so, yeah, so I sort of took, Zoe had started as a way to kind of plug Joe and Percy into the real world. She was that a little bit the voice of the reader, the voice of maybe even the present, because there was always that girl back then in the when I was in college in the early 2000s who was talking about the male gaze and the patriarchy and everything, and we were all just like, okay, there she goes again. And now it's totally nor she was just ahead of her time.
Yeah.
So that's how she started. And then at some point, I realized that I wanted her to play a bigger role. And I took this one character feature of one of my best friends, Rachel, who is a very bossy friend. I don't know if you have any bossy friends, but I
Oh,
highly
yeah.
recommend. And she's just really fiercely supportive of me and not afraid to call me on my shit. And I knew that that would fit with the character that I had started developing in those early chapters. And so then I kind of heightened that. I played that up a little bit and went back to the earlier chapters and plugged it in more. And just, yeah, it made her that bossy friend. Again, it was sort of like a little bit of my real life that I plugged into it.
I think it was so interesting to me as well that when I first started reading the book, I almost wanted to dislike her. And I think it's that sort of really, it's quite toxic of me to admit that, because I think it is that toxic kind of competition between women of that you're really rooting for Percy and Joey and the connection that they have like quite instantly. And you're like, she's the thing that's in the way. We want to get rid of her. And actually like the book overall, like she's such an amazing character, and she becomes such a huge part of Percy's life and stays in Percy's life as a constant in ways that Joey sometimes doesn't. And I'm trying not to give any spoilers here, but I just think, yeah, she's such a beautiful character, and I found it really interesting that I had that initial reaction to her.
Yeah, I think that's really, I appreciate you admitting that. I don't think anybody's really told me that yet, but it makes sense that that's how you would first view that competition. Yeah, as the book went on, I really relied on Zoe too to kind of quietly drive some plot
Yeah.
in a way that wasn't, you never want plot to feel random,
Yeah.
it has to come from somewhere. It usually comes from the protagonist. That's the definition of a protagonist. But when you're writing a story about somebody just kind of groping their way through their 20s, you can't always, not every decision is going, or not everything that happens in your life is going to be because of your own decisions. There are other things that happen to you. And so Zoe was a really useful way for me to kind of push some things forward gently that felt true to me in my experience in my 20s. And even now, I mean, my bossy friend Rachel is the reason that I sent my manuscript to the woman who became my agent, because I had to ask a favor to get her email address. And I was so scared of asking that favor. And I finally had, Rachel was like, you are getting off this phone and you are sending that email. And then I didn't. And she called me 10 minutes later. She was like, did you send the email?
Oh my God, I love that.
That happens. Women do that for each other, And I think
Yes.
that I was really thrilled that I could work that in.
What's your friend's name? Did you say Rachel?
Yeah.
We love Rachel. Thank God, Rachel. Thank God for Rachel. She's created this amazing character. She gave you the push. We love that. And thank God she did, because I just love this book so much. And I want to ask about quite a special part in the book that resonated with me. And it's about Percy's relationship with her family, but specifically with her mum. And I love reading about mother-daughter dynamics. I think they're just so fascinating. But what I found interesting about Percy's family is that kind of element of not necessarily competition, because I don't think she falls into that with her brother, but there's definitely a sense of the brother is the favourite, their son is their favourite, and he's this kind of sports person, and he has that as his hobby, and they really support that. But her kind of love of music and passion for music isn't necessarily supported as much. Well, that was my interpretation of it. And I found it's kind of funny that they both move away, but her brother's room is like preserved, but hers isn't. And I think that just kind of tells you so much. Like her room is turned into like this room for a treadmill. And yeah, I was just really interested in their relationship. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about exploring that dynamic and what impact that had on Percy's character.
Yeah, I really wanted it to be super nuanced. I think because she was so young,
Hmm.
I felt like it was important that
Yeah.
you get to know a little bit about where she came from and what and the mom just quickly became super interesting to me. I could have written more, but she was just, she's where a lot of Percy's least desirable qualities come from.
Hmm.
And I was kind of just like working my way backwards to come up with that. It's like, okay, she has all these opinions about music. She knows stuff about music, but her mom's like a snob. I was just kind of reverse engineering stuff. And then again, it was just one of those feeling my way through things. I wanted to talk. I wanted to the boy to be sort of the hero of the family because I think that can easily happen. But I didn't want it to be in this really like cartoonish way, like
Yeah.
that can happen often in books and TV shows where it's really over the top. And I don't think that's the way it usually happens. I mean, parents love both of their kids,
Hmm.
It's not like it's just his passion and his personality just took up more space in the
Hmm.
family and hers didn't. And
Yeah.
that's just a natural fact. And so I was trying to make their relationship just not all good and not all bad and
Hmm.
not just and explain where Percy came to be in a way that felt like, again, just this is where Percy's worst qualities came from, but Percy's worst qualities are also her superpowers.
Yeah.
And so we love her mom and we love Percy, but we also can see how hard it is to be both of them. That's what I
Yeah.
was trying to do.
No, absolutely. And I think you got that balance perfectly because you do see the really beautiful parts of their bond, but you also see the kind of fraught elements of their relationship. And I think, there's a moment where Percy's having a panic attack and she rings her mum in like the early hours. And, her mum's like, towards the end of the call, her mum's like, are you doing okay? Whatever. And then she's like, this is all I needed. Like, she just wanted to hear her mum's voice. And I think that's just such a like gorgeous moment in that, like, no matter what happens, like, you want your mum's voice, like, you want that. Just
Yeah.
thought that was wonderful. I'm gonna move back slightly and look at Percy's music taste because I forgot to ask this before, and I wanted to know if her because obviously each chapter of the book is named after the title of a song, and there is also an accompanying playlist for your book. So I want to ask about Percy's music taste and whether you curated that or whether that was your own taste, and how the chapter titles came about as well.
It's my own taste.
Yes.
I wrote this very much as a passion project. I was really having fun. If I had to write about songs I didn't love, it would not have been as fun. And so I had started writing a project before this, which I've now gone back to, that required some research. And at that phase of my life, I have more time in my day now. But at that point, I was like, I don't, this is just taking too much of my precious writing time.
Mhm.
I just want to do something that comes purely from me, that is set in cities I've lived in, schools I went to, jobs that I have, the music I love. And so it was just purely my taste. As for the chapter titles, that was from the very beginning. People never seem to believe that. I don't know why. Where I came up with that idea. It's certainly not, I'm not the first person to ever do it. It
Mhm.
just seems like that would be one way to structure the book, kind of like
Mhm.
a mixtape. But I did play around with it a bit. There were chapters for a while. There were smaller kind of interstitial chapters that came in between the more narrative chapters where there would be just like a meditation on anxiety that was all about some Elvis Costello song and had no plot in it. It was just Percy writing about this song and it would be like half a page long. I had a bunch of those kind of scattered in throughout. And then I realized the longer the other chapters got, the more I figured out what I was doing. I realized that wasn't the kind of book I was writing anymore.
Mhm.
Felt a little pretentious. So I jettisoned those. I went through a phase where I was writing about 2 or 3 songs per chapter, and then I started calling it like songs about happiness. There's that one chapter which they kind of go through a bunch of songs about happiness, or like songs about disappearing or songs about breaking out. And then it would be like about more than one. And then I dialed that back. So yeah, I played around with it, but the idea to really focus on like really actually talk about music, talk about songs within the context of the narrative was there from the beginning. And to have them be the chapter titles was part of the initial idea.
I loved it, and I love the playlist as well. I have been reading your book over the weekend whilst I was in Paris, and I downloaded the playlist, and I was kind of going between listening to the playlist and reading the book whilst flying to and from Paris, and I just had the best time with it. I absolutely loved it. So thank you.
I love that. I love that.
I want to ask, because this kind of links into the music, but there's so much nostalgia in this book, and so much of it is set at the start of the noughties, and we see the sort of beginnings of the communication shifts that happened around that time, you know, from email to instant messenger to text, and the sort of rise of social media. And I'm curious how you kind of felt in terms of communication, like in terms of the shift in how we communicate and what that means in terms of a love story. Do you think it's kind of a loss that we don't have those forms of communication anymore?
Yeah, I do. Mostly because I think that those forms of communication helped us express ourselves
Hmm.
and help us connect without pulling our attention away from each other,
Hmm.
because they stayed at home, you know.
Yeah.
They stayed at home when we went out and interacted. And I didn't think that that would be a big part of the book when I set out to write it. I mean, I said it in the noughties because that's when I was young and I knew I
Hmm.
wanted to read about young people. And then the more that I was sort of putting myself back in those moments and remembering what it was like to be at a college house party or to be just like killing time in the backyard, I remembered that we were all just kind of looking at each other. We were all so much more present.
Mm.
And it hit me that it really was sort of the perfect backdrop that time for a connection, for a story about connection and belonging, outsiders finding belonging. All of these themes really worked well
Hmm.
in that time, because really specifically, I think because there were no smartphones.
Yes, that's so true. I mean, I was born in 95, so I've kind of seen the growth of social media, and it's kind of spiraled really quickly whilst like in my lifetime. But I kind of really wish that I'd been around for the long emails that people would send to each other. That's something that I would have really liked to have seen, because I think you're right. We've kind of lost the art of being present, and, you know, not instantly being able to like text somebody back, or like, you know, there's no breathing space between communication. And I think sometimes you need that.
Right.
One of the things that I loved about that sort of breaks in communication is there's a notebook in the book that I'm not going to give any spoilers, so I won't name characters, but there's a notebook that's used by two of the characters, and they leave like notes and drawings and, you know, like random little bits for each other. And they can only see that when they return home and see, you know, what was left by the other person or what wasn't left by the other person. And I just thought that was a really beautiful way to kind of show, yeah, how much has changed in terms of the way we communicate.
Yeah. And it was really, the notebook, I think, is particularly archaic in a way. Like that could have happened, you know, in the 1920s.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other forms of communication that are really specific to that time, where things were starting to happen. You know,
Hmm.
we had MySpace and we had
Hmm.
blogging, and it felt like this sort of Wild West playground online where you could do these new exciting things. And an iPod,
Mm.
just joking on these podcasts, I just wish we would have stopped at the iPod, when you could have just like thousands of songs on a device in your pocket, but your boss couldn't email you on it.
Yes.
It was a beautiful moment. So I was interested in exploring not just sort of like the absence of smartphones, but what we did have in that moment before they messed it all up by just like
Mm.
it as data mining and by giving us the entire internet in our pocket, which is just not healthy.
No, not at all. God, I remember downloading like so many songs onto like the iTunes thing and like going through the lists and like making playlists and feeling so smug about it. And then it started kind of growing so fast. I think I had like an iPod Nano, which was like, I don't know, it felt like quite a basic version of the iPod, but then people started getting iPod Touch and then it's just, yeah, it blew up. But yeah, I miss that. I want to ask you about setting because through this book we're kind of transported from New York to San Francisco, and there's LA, and there's quite a few places that we go to. There's a lot of like gigs and sort of dive bars and sticky dance floors and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, we really see the kind of music scene in those places. And I wanted to ask, you know, what was important to you in terms of setting. And I know that New York is a big feature and you do explore things like 9/11, and there's a blackout, which I don't know if this blackout actually happened, but I thought that
Oh yeah.
said so much about New Yorkers. So yeah, could you talk about setting and the role it played in the book?
Yeah, the blackout of 2003 was real.
Oh
I was
wow.
there. Yeah, it was just a really, really fun night, fun day and night. God, I started, like I said, I started with this idea that I was just going to write what I knew
Hmm.
because it was all I had time for and I wanted to have fun. And so I started with the first place I ever really loved, truly deeply loved and felt at home in, which was Berkeley. Not that I didn't, my hometown is lovely too. I don't want any Canadians coming after me, but it was a very small town, so there weren't, I was always felt a little different. My parents were American. Anyway, I got to Berkeley and was like, oh, these are my people. This is where I belong. I loved the craftsman homes. Everything about it felt so warm and comfortable and warm and cozy. I think at one point in the book, she says, I think this might be how everyone feels about their college towns because it's just that time in your life too,
Hmm.
not just the setting. I would say that time and setting were very just inextricably linked for
Hmm.
me because that is not how Berkeley is anymore. It's a little bit like that, but there are Teslas in every other driveway.
No.
And it's changed. Everything's changed. The bar that features in the first chapter has now been gutted because of a fire and renovated with like engineered wood, and it doesn't have the same vibe or the same feel,
No.
Yeah, so I wasn't just exploring these places, I was exploring these places in these specific times.
Mm.
And that's why there's things like the blackout of 2003 in New York, because that was part of that summer, and that was the same summer as Outcasts, Hey Ya, and The Way You Move. It was the summer of Beyonce's Crazy in Love,
So
and
good.
yeah, it was just such a great summer.
Yeah.
I didn't want to write about New York so much as I wanted to write about that New York.
Yes. Oh my God, so beautiful. I did love that I was really hopeful that the blackout had happened because it just seemed like such a beautiful way to kind of illustrate that community feel and people coming together and shops giving people like cold drinks and people sitting in the streets, and I just thought it seemed so fun. But I love that you mentioned those songs because Hey Ya and Crazy in Love were just so great, and you play them on a dance floor now and everyone kind of pops off to them, so
Totally. It was like that instantly.
I love
But
that. I could talk to you all day about this book. I said I don't want to give any spoilers, so I've been very careful and I'm quite proud of myself. But I am curious, because of the way the book finishes, whether you would ever return to these characters or whether you're like, no, I love them there and people can kind of interpret it as they wish.
I my initial answer to this question when I first started getting asked it was no. I don't
Mm.
want to. I ended it the way that I ended it for a reason. It's funny though, over time that I don't know. People love Percy so much. much.
Yes.
And I love Percy so much. And I don't know, never say never, I guess, is where I'm at now.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be in a really obvious way though. It would be like, I don't know, like the way, Jennifer Egan returned to the Goon Squad
Yeah.
characters in Candy House. I think I would do it in a oblique way if I ever did it, but I don't know.
Mm.
No plans to at present.
I'm always talking on the podcast about my love for adaptations, and I thought this book would be so incredible if it was to be adapted. Is there anything on the horizon about that?
Oh, you haven't Googled this, have you?
No, I wanted to ask.
Oh, this is so fun. I'm gonna blow your mind. I'm gonna
Stop.
blow your mind. Okay. It has been sold to A24 and it will be produced by and starring Saoirse Ronan.
Shut up. Oh my God, don't I love Saoirse Ronan?
Wait, you gotta hear Joe. Joe is going to be Austin Butler.
Shut up.
I
Oh
don't know
my
how I got so
God.
lucky. I really don't. And the
I
writer
don't know how
director
I've dodged this information.
it's I'm really happy you have because I feel like I never get to deliver it anymore
Yes.
because people just find out online. So now this has been very fun for me. Thank you.
Oh my God, we've
Uh,
went into the nostalgia noise. You've just told me. I've not gone to the internet. That's so amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. And the writer director is Sean Durkin, who did the Iron Claw,
Wow.
and one called Martha, Marcy May Marlene that I really love. So it feels like I don't know. It just feels like the whole thing is quality. That's what I'm most excited about. Is that
Yes.
it's not just like some buzzy actress. It's like these are really, really quality actors and writers and directors and producers in the studio, like top to bottom. It's just like I'm
Incredible.
happy.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you. And for a debut novel, like the way this has taken off, I mean, incredible. Like, how do you feel? Did you ever expect any of this?
No, God, no. I truly had no idea. And I remember early on my agent asking me if I'd thought about an adaptation and who would play Percy. And I was like, what are you talking about? Percy is Percy. Like she's this person in my head, and they would name actors, and it all felt weird. And then they told me Saoirse Ronan had read the book and really loved it. And I was like, okay, yep, yep,
Salt to that.
that sounds good.
Oh my God, I
I'm
love
sold.
Saoirse Ronan. This is incredible. Oh, I cannot wait to see this. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on a beautiful book and on the adaptation that's sort of coming. I'm really excited to watch that. Before I let you go, I do like to end on a recommendation. So is there anything, books, TV, films, anything culturally that you'd love to recommend?
I will recommend The Safekeep.
Amazing.
Have you read it? So
Yes.
good, right?
So
And if
good.
there's anybody out there who hasn't read it yet, you really should.
This
Do
is your
yourself a
nudge.
favor.
Yes.
So beautiful.
Incredible book. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Holly, for joining me on a pair of bookends today. It's been such a joy chatting to you. Where can my listeners find you online?
I'm on Instagram at Holly Brick.
Amazing. And if you enjoyed this episode, listeners, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And that is all we've got time for. But thank you so much again, Holly. I've loved chatting to you. And as I said, I've loved this book. So everyone go buy it.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Bye.